The radio cracked to life just after midnight, that ugly burst of static punching through the quiet like it didn't belong there. At first, I thought it was just interference old equipment, bad signal, same junk we deal with every night. Then, a voice came through, thin, breathing hard, not screaming, but close. Dispatch said it was a lost hiker somewhere deep in the Superstition Mountains. No coordinates, no trail name, just heavy breathing and one sentence that didn't sit right. I can hear them walking around me. My partner looked at me, and I already knew what he was thinking. This was exactly the kind of call we're not supposed to answer after dark. The kind that gets logged, acknowledged, and ignored until sunrise. The radio kept hissing, like someone was riding the mic on the other end, listening. Dispatch asked if we were rolling. I hesitated longer than I should have. Every instinct in my gut was screaming no, and that's when I realized something worse than the call itself. We were already breaking the rule just by responding. Before I tell you why that rule exists, you need to understand who I am, and why I know better than most what happens out there after dark. Asterisk before you start thinking this is just another campfire story. Let me be clear about something. I'm not some thrill seeker, not a YouTuber chasing clicks, and definitely not someone who skiz easy. I'm an Arizona Sheriff's deputy. Badge, patrol unit, body cam, the whole deal. I've been doing this long enough to tell the difference between panic, lies, and the kind of fear that crawls out of places most people never set foot in. I work one of the rougher counties, where the desert doesn't care who you are and back up. Can be 40 minutes out on a good night. I've handled my share of messed up calls, fatal wrecks, where the heat cooked the bodies before we got there. Domestic calls that went sideways fast, tweakers hiding in washes thinking they're invisible. I've dragged people out of mine shafts, found lost kids dehydrated and barely breathing, and stood over scenes that still come back to me when it's quiet. None of that shook me the way the mountains did. You learn early out here that Arizona isn't just cactus and sunsets. The land has teeth. The terrain changes fast, cell service drops without warning, and the dark feels heavier than it should. Most of the time, that's manageable. You rely on training, experience, and the guy next to you. That's how law enforcement works. You trust the system. You trust the rules. And yeah, I believed in those rules once. Thought they were written by people who knew better than I did. Guys with more years, more scars, more ghosts riding shotgun. When I first transferred near the Superstition Mountains, I treated it like any other assignment. Same procedures, same confidence. I figured the stories were just local noise old-timers spooking rookies, hikers exaggerating because they got lost and freaked out. Happens all the time. But here's the thing, nobody tells you straight up. Experience doesn't make you fearless. It just teaches you when to shut up and listen. After enough late nights, enough calls that didn't add up, you start noticing patterns. The way dispatch changes tone, the way supervisors dodge certain questions, the way seasoned deputies go quiet when a location name comes over the radio. I didn't earn my caution from legends or superstition. I earned it on duty, in uniform, with a radio in my hand and a responsibility to make it home alive. And if you want to understand why a deputy like me hesitates when the Superstition Mountains come up, especially after dark, you first need to understand what that place feels. Like when the sun goes down. Asterisk, all right. Let me take you deep into the heart of this story, the Superstition Mountains at night. If you've never been out there after the sun dips below the horizon, you're missing out on something almost otherworldly. Most folks think it's just rugged terrain, cactus, and the occasional rattlesnake. But out there when darkness falls, it's a whole different beast. See, the mountains aren't just a backdrop. They're a living, breathing presence. The way the shadows stretch and warp, how the wind carries sounds that don't quite make sense, like footsteps that stop when you try to listen, or whispers that fade into the night air before you catch the words. The silence out there isn't peaceful, it's heavy. It presses down on you like a weight, making your skin crawl and your breath hitch without warning. Locals, the ones who've lived in the shadows of those peaks their whole lives, talk about things you don't hear in the tourist brochures. Stories about voices calling from the cliffs, people vanishing without a trace, and lights flickering far off in places no one should be. Some say it's the spirits of lost souls. Others blame old curses or the mountain's own wild heart. Whatever it is, it's enough to make even the most hardened deputy think twice before answering a call once the sun's gone. I've been on patrol. They're enough to know the difference between normal and weird. The mountain's got a way of messing with your head, your sense of direction, your confidence. Hell, even the way your radio works. Cell phones drop dead, GPS glitches out, and sometimes the radio will cut in with static that sounds almost like a voice calling your name. You feel watched, like something's just beyond your sight, waiting. And the isolation, don't get me started. Out there, you're hours from backup, no streetlights, no witnesses, just you, the night, and whatever's lurking in the dark. That's why the rules are so strict, why the higher-ups want deputies to avoid night rescues in that hellhole. Unless it's an absolute emergency. It's not just about danger from the terrain or animals. It's about something else, something nobody official will ever put in a report. The mountains have a history soaked in mystery and fear. They say the Apache who once roamed those lands left warnings behind, sins etched into rock, stories passed down about things that shouldn't be disturbed. And every so often, those warnings seem to come true. Rescue teams have gone in, never come back the same. Some don't come back at all. And even when people survive, they're never the same, haunted, broken, and never wanting to speak about what they saw. That atmosphere, that tension, builds every minute you're out there after dark. Your senses sharpen, but it's like they're fighting a war inside your head. You're hyper-aware, and yet somehow blind to what's really around you. The rustle in the bushes isn't always wind. The snap of a twig might not be a deer. Sometimes it's something else entirely. Something watching, something patient. So when that call came in, the one that broke all the rules, it wasn't just the voice on the radio that unsettled me. It was knowing the mountains were awakened. Whatever's awake in those shadows doesn't like visitors. That knowledge settles in your bones and makes you hesitate, makes you question every step you take toward those cursed peaks. But before I dive into why we have that rule and why it's broken more often than anyone admits, you need to understand what it feels like to be out there, surrounded by that dark, silent menace. Because once you've been in the Superstition Mountains at night, you'll know why some things are better left alone. Next, I'll tell you about the rule everybody in the department knows why. Night rescues, they're forbidden. And what happens when those rules get broken? Asterisk. Everybody in the department knows the rule, plain and simple. Night rescues in the Superstition Mountains, off limits. No exceptions. Officially, it's all about safety, rough terrain, zero visibility, dangerous wildlife, and the fact that backup's often miles away when you're scrambling up those rocky slopes. They say it's too risky, that the chances of making it out alive at night drop drastically. And yeah, those are valid reasons. No one wants to lose deputies or civilians because someone took a reckless call. But if you ask the guys who've been around longer, you'll get a different story, the unofficial reasons nobody talks about in reports or meetings. See, it's say. Less about the rocks and snakes, and more about something else. Something deeper. The kind of thing that doesn't show up on any risk assessment or training manual. The kind of danger that sticks in your gut and makes your hair stand on end. Even when the mountains look calm, there are whispers about how people who get rescued, or even just found after dark, don't come back the same. They're quiet, jumpy, sometimes just vanish again without a trace. Stories circulate about strange noises echoing through the canyons, shadows moving against the natural flow of the wind, and lights flickering in places no one should be. When deputies push the limits and go after those night calls, some never return, and others come back with blank stares and broken spirits. The official line: it's all about safety, protocols, and liability. The truth: some folks believe the mountains themselves don't want outsiders poking around once the sun sets. That there's something ancient, something watching and waiting, that no badge or radio can protect you from. You learn real fast that the forbidden part isn't just a rule to keep you alive. It's a line you don't cross if you want to keep your mind intact. I've heard the debates during shift briefings, some deputies pushing to ignore the rule, calling it cowardice or bureaucracy. But the ones who've been there, who've seen what's out there after dark, they're the ones with the quietest voices and the farthest gazes. They don't question it anymore. You either learn to respect that line, or you end up as part. The story whispered around the station when new recruits come in. So yeah, the night rescues are forbidden rule sounds straightforward. But underneath it all is a history of things best left alone. A warning that goes beyond what any official paper can say. And when you break that rule, well, you're not just risking your life, you're risking everything. Coming up next, I'll get into why that rule exists, past incidents, strange disappearances, and the kind of nightmares that don't show up in the logs. Stick around, asterisk. There's always been chatter about why that rule exists, why nobody dares to argue with it, or break it without thinking twice. It's not just some arbitrary safety precaution cooked up by administrators behind desks. Nah, it's born from real, bone-chilling incidents that no one officially talks about but everyone knows about. Over the years, there have been plenty of cases where folks went missing in the superstitions, hikers, hunters, even deputies, people who ventured out after dark or got caught there when the sun dipped below the horizon. The strange part isn't just that they disappeared, but how they did. Some were never found at all. Others showed up days later, if at all, but not like they'd been rescued. More like dropped back. Silent, distant. Acting like they'd seen something that broke them in ways no one could fix. I can't go into detail about every incident, trust me. Some stories would make your blood run cold, but the pattern's the same. Night rescues. lead to people being found in odd places, with no memory of what happened or with injuries that don't line up with any known animal, attack, or accident. And then there are the rumors, things moving in the shadows, strange sounds on the radio, unexplained lights flickering miles from the nearest campsite. One deputy I knew disappeared on a night rescue years ago. We never found him. All that came back was his radio, left on a cliff edge, still crackling with static. Some say the mountains took him. Others say he walked off on his own, but changed into something else. Stories like that don't make the official reports, but they stick in your head when you're out there alone in the dark. That's why the rule is hammered home hard. It's not just about the dangers you can see, the cliffs, snakes, or getting lost. It's about the dangers lurking in the dark that you can't see, can't fight, and maybe can't even explain. The Superstition Mountains hold secrets, and the nights there, they're a different kind of danger altogether. So when you hear someone say night rescues are forbidden, know that it's not just about protoclits, a line drawn in blood and silence, born from a history of fear and loss. But don't get me wrong, breaking that rule doesn't just put you in danger. It pulls everyone who follows you into it. Next up, I'm going to tell you about the night we finally broke that rule, the call we should have left alone, and how everything started to unravel from there. Asterisk, it was just past midnight when the call came through, the kind of call every deputy dreads but also can't ignore completely. Dispatch crackled on the radio, voice low but urgent, passing along the details of a lost hiker somewhere deep in the Superstition Mountains. The location was vague, a spot nobody on the team really knew well, near one of those old, winding trails that disappear into nothingness after dark. The kind of place where even the bravest guys don't want to be caught. Without a flashlight and a prayer, I remember the hesitation that hit me like a punch to the gut. My partner and I exchanged glances, both knowing the rule inside out. No night rescues out there, ever. But this call felt different. The voice on the other end sounded desperate but calm, like someone who knew they were already in trouble but hadn't lost their head yet. The timing didn't help either. The moon was barely a sliver, the stars mostly hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, making the mountains even darker and more unforgiving. We sat there for a moment, radio silent except for the faint static crackling between words. I could feel my heart pounding, not just from adrenaline, but from the weight of knowing what ignoring this call could mean, but also what answering it might cost us. We're trained to protect and serve, but sometimes the rules aren't just rules, they're warnings. And this was one hell of a warning. Finally, we flipped on the sirens and punched the gas. The patrol truck's headlights cut through the darkness, but no matter how far we drove, the sense of unease didn't fade. That call wasn't just a call. It was a challenge, an invitation into something we'd been told to stay away from. Little did we know, answering that one call would change everything. It wasn't just a rescue mission anymore. It was the start of a nightmare we couldn't escape from. But before I get into what happened out there, you've got to know what it feels like stepping into those mountains after dark. The silence, the shadows, the way the radio suddenly doesn't sound like your lifeline anymore. Asterisk, rolling into the mountains after dark is a whole different ball game. It's like stepping into another world where every sound is amplified and every shadow plays tricks on your mind. The headlights only reach so far before everything dissolves into pitch black. The usual hum of the radio starts glitching, crackling with static, cutting out just when you need it most. It's like the mountain itself is messing with the signals. making you feel more isolated than you already are. My crew was tight, but even the toughest guys started shifting in their seats, eyes darting toward the windows more than usual. The kind of silence that creeps up on you doesn't just settle, it presses in, making your heartbeats sound like thunder in your ears. You catch things out the corner of your eyewigs snapping, a shadow moving, but when you look, there's nothing there. The wind carries sounds that don't belong, like distant footsteps or whispers just out of reach. Every so often, the radio would pop alive with random static bursts, sometimes cutting through with a voice so faint you'd swear. It was on the edge of reality. You try calling dispatch, but the responses are delayed, garbled, or sometimes just dead silence. The usual lifeline starts to feel more like a cruel joke, and the fear, it's not the adrenaline rush of a dangerous call. It's the kind that seeps into your bones, the kind that grows with every step you take deeper into the dark. Its contagious spread from one person to the next without a word spoken. No one says it outright, but the looks say it all. We all know we're pushing boundaries that weren't meant to be crossed. That night, every noise was louder, every shadow longer, and the mountains seemed to be watching us, waiting. You can't shake the feeling that you're trespassing on something ancient, something alive. And once you start feeling it, there's no turning back. Next, I'll tell you about the moment when things started to go off the rails. The silence that wasn't silence, and the rules we were already breaking without realizing it. Stick with me. Asterisk. Out there in the darkness, things started to feel off, real off. The kind of silence that doesn't just mean there's nothing around, it means something is deliberately holding its breath, waiting. We stopped hearing the usual sounds of wildlife or the wind rustling through the brush. Instead, there was this heavy, unnatural quiet, like the mountain was swallowing every noise we tried to make. Then came the movement. Not the kind you expect, no rustling bushes or scampering critters, but something slow, deliberate, and way too big to be any animal we knew. Shadows shifted against the terrain in ways that made no sense, shapes that flickered at the edge of our vision only to vanish when we looked straight on. My partner caught something, he swore he saw a figure standing still, just beyond the reach of the headlights. But when we aimed the beam there, it was empty. Nothing but darkness. Radio. Chatter started breaking down even more. Calls we made to dispatch didn't get replies, or the voices we did hear sounded distant, distorted, like they were coming from another world. It felt like the mountain was messing with us, isolating us further. And here's the kicker: the rules. We all lived by the ones, drilled into us from day one. They were starting to slip through our fingers. We knew we weren't supposed to be there, not after dark, and yet, with every step forward, we were breaking those rules more and more. There was no turning back now, no safe retreat. The night had us in its grip. You start questioning everything. Your training, your instincts, even your sanity. The fear isn't just about what you might face out there. It's about the creeping realization that some things can't be fought with badges or guns. You're a visitor in a place where the rules are written in something darker and older than any law. That's when the nightmare truly began. But before I tell you about what we encountered, the moment that changed everything, you need to know how the escape played out. How we tried to get out alive, and what we left behind. Asterisk, there's a moment. You don't forget the moment everything you thought you knew about this world gets shoved aside and replaced with something raw, primal, and utterly terrifying. That night, deep in the Superstition Mountains, we ran face first into something that didn't belong, something that shouldn't exist. We'd been creeping along a narrow trail, every nerve on edge, when the air shifted. It wasn't just the cold or the silence anymore. It was something heavier, darker. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, something large and impossibly fast. 1 second it was gone, the next it was right there. No shadow, no shape you could point to, just a presence. The hairs on my neck stood up, and I swear my breath hitched like I'd just swallowed a fistful of ice. My partner whispered, "Did you see that?" But I was frozen, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. That's when the smell hit Usta. Sick, rotten stench of something ancient and wrong, like decay mixed with sulfur and something I can't even put words to. It filled the air, thick and choking. We knew we were looking at something that wasn't just an animal or some crazy local legend. This was something else. Something alive, but not quite living. Something that didn't want us there. And it was. Close to close. I can't give you the full picture. Not because I'm hiding it, but because it's the kind of thing your mind refuses to hold on to. It blurs, shifts, like a nightmare dissolving when you wake. What I do know is that whatever, it was moved with a speed and intent that no human or animal could match. The feeling of its gaze, if you can call it, that was like being stared at by the void itself. We tried to hold our ground, but instinct kicked in. You don't stay and argue when faced with something that makes your soul scream. We bolted. Scrambling down the rocky trail, adrenaline pushing us faster than any training drill ever could. But we weren't alone. Something followed. Not the usual sounds of pursuit, but a presence saw ways just behind us, breathing down our necks, unseen. But unmistakable. That night changed us. The mountain didn't just scare us, it marked us. What we faced wasn't meant to be known, and it didn't take kindly to our intrusion. Next, I'll share how we managed to escape, how panic and desperation drove us to run for our lives, and what we left behind in that cursed place. Hang tight. The worst is yet to come. Asterisk when the instinct to survive kicks in. Everything else fades into the background. That night, after we came face to face with something that defied explanation, the only thing left in my mind was one simple goal: get the hell out of those mountains alive. We didn't just walk away. We ran like our lives depended on it, because they did. Every snap of a twig, every shadow stretching beyond the beam of our flashlights felt like it was closing in. My partner was right beside me, but even in the chaos, I could see the fear in his eyes, the same kind I felt burning in my eye. Chest. This wasn't some adrenaline-fueled action scene. It was raw, gut-wrenching panic. Somewhere along the way, we realized we weren't alone. That thing, whatever it was, hadn't given up. The sounds behind us weren't consist more like an echo of movement that didn't belong in this world. It was patient, stalking us, slipping between the trees and rocks like it was part of the mountain itself. In our desperate dash, we made mistakes. Paths we'd planned to take vanished under darkness, and rough terrain slowed us down. And then, there was the worst part. Somewhere in the madness, one of our own got separated. The radio crackled with frantic calls, but the responses were weak, shaky, almost drowned out by static. We had no choice but to keep moving. Every second we stayed was a risk none of us were willing to take. That night, the mountain claimed more than just fear. It took someone with it. We never found them, No trace. Just an empty space in our team and a weight in our hearts that never lifted. We made it out, battered and broken, but with a new understanding. Some things in the superstitions aren't meant to be challenged. The mountain isn't just a place. It's a warning written in shadows and silence. Up next, I'll talk about what happened after we escaped the aftermath that followed. How reports were twisted, and the orders that came down from above too. Bury what really went down that night. Stay with Met, only gets darker from here. Asterisk coming out of the Superstition Mountains. That night felt like stepping out of a nightmare and into a world that wanted to forget it ever happened. The physical wounds healed, but the mental scars, those stuck around. What shook me the most wasn't just what we saw or experienced out there, was what happened next. Once we were back at the station, the official reports started filtering through, but they felt ... off. Details were missing, timelines shifted, and the urgency we'd felt in the field got scrubbed clean from the paperwork. Names were left out. Parts of the call were vague or disappeared altogether. It was like someone hit a reset button, trying to erase the real story. We all knew why. Harrops wanted this buried fast and deep. No questions, no investigations, no loose ends. There were orders handed down to keep quiet, to not talk about what we'd seen or heard. Threats, subtle but clear, made sure that even among deputies, the story stayed locked behind closed doors. The missing teammate. Officially, he was listed as lost and presumed dead, but no one really bought the sanitized version. Rumors spread about search teams turning back early, about strange interference on their radios, and a general sense that the mountain itself was pushing people away. The weight of that silence was suffocating. It wasn't just about fear of what lurked in the dark. It was the fear of what admitting the truth would bring. The mountain has its own law, and the people running the show weren't willing to challenge it. After all, who wants to deal with something that can't be explained or controlled? For those of us who lived through it, that night became a ghost we carried with us everywhere, something that followed us home, sat with us in quiet moments, and whispered warnings we couldn't ignore. It wasn't just an incident. It was a turning point, a brutal reminder that some rules exist for a reason, and breaking them comes with a price. Next up, I'll get into the unspoken truths that deputies like me hold close to things we don't say aloud but all know in our bones. Why the rule against night rescues isn't just policy but a survival tactic. Stick around, this is where the real story lies. Asterisk. If you spend enough time working these mountains, you start to pick up on things nobody puts in writing, stuff the official manuals won't touch. The unspoken truths that every deputy knows but nobody talks about out loud. It's the kind of knowledge passed down quietly in the break rooms, in hushed conversations, or through knowing glances when a new recruit asks the wrong question. We all believe there's something living in those shadows, something older than any legend or lore. It's not a ghost story to scare tourists, it's real. It's why we avoid night rescues like the plague. It's not just about keeping ourselves safe. It's about protecting whatever fragile thread of sanity we have left when we step away. From the edge of the mountains, the rule still stands because it works. It's a line drawn between life and something else, something we don't understand but instinctively fear. Even the toughest deputies know better than to cross it. It's survival, plain and simple. And it's more than just a guideline. It's a lifeline. We don't talk about what's out there because words can't do it justice. And sometimes, speaking it aloud feels like calling it closer. But the quiet fear, that's real. The dread that builds when the sun dips below the horizon and the mountains seem to breathe. That's why the rule isn't just policy, it's respect for something ancient and powerful that's better left alone. So yeah, we wear the badge and carry the gun, but when you're out there at night, none of that matters. What matters is knowing when to listen to the silence, when to back off, and when to trust the stories that sound crazy on paper, but make perfect sense in the dark. Next, I want to leave you with a final warning, the kind you don't hear on any official channel, but comes from experience, from the people who've seen the worst. If you ever find yourself near those mountains after dark, take it seriously, because some rules aren't made to be broken. Stick around for the last part. Asterisk, look, I'm going to be straight with you, Ev. You ever find yourself near the Superstition Mountains when the sun's gone down, don't be that person who thinks rules are just suggestions. This isn't some spooky campfire tale to keep kids in line. It's real. The kind of real that sticks with you long after you leave. You might hear those stories and think, yeah, sure, sounds creepy, but probably just local legends blown out of proportion. I get it. I thought that way too until I saw things that don't belong in this world, felt the mountain's cold stare, and lived through a night that nearly broke me. Night rescues in those mountains aren't just dangerous because of the terrain or animals. There's something else out there, something ancient, something that doesn't like being disturbed. It's patient. It watches us, and it waits. If you ignore the warnings, you're not just risking your life, you're stepping into a nightmare that no one else can pull you out of. So here's my final warning to you. Respect the rule. Stay out of the Superstition Mountains after dark. Don't be the reason they add another lost hiker or deputy to the list. Trust me, the silence there isn't empty, it's waiting. And whatever's waiting, it doesn't want company. If you're curious, if you love a good thrill, go during the day. Take a hike, see the views, enjoy the legends from a safe distance. But once that sun sets, the mountains change. They don't forgive, they don't forget, and they don't care about your badge, your gear, or your courage. Remember some rules aren't just rules, they're lifelines. And sometimes the scariest thing isn't what's out there in the dark, but what happens when you decide to ignore the warnings. Alright, before I let you go, there's just one last thing, the soft, fading out, the silence that comes after a story like this. Because even when you think it's over, the mountain's watching. Next up, the final outro to close this story with the eerie silence and that haunting radio static you heard in the beginning. Stick around, asterisk. And so here we are, at the end of this story, but maybe it's not really the end. You see, out in the Superstition Mountains, the silence after dark isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It's waiting. Like the air itself is holding its breath, keeping secrets that don't want to be spoken aloud. As I sit here, typing this out or telling you these words, I can almost hear the faint crackle of a radio static slipping through, carrying whispers from the dark. It's the kind of sound that unsettles you, the kind that makes you check over your shoulder when you think no one's watching. This story doesn't just fade away like a campfire's dying embers. It lingers, just like the mountains do unchanged. Watching waiting for the next soul who thinks they can outsmart the night. So if you ever find yourself near those peaks when the sky turns black, remember this story. Remember the warnings hidden in the silence. And most importantly, remember why some things are better left alone. Because in the Superstition Mountains, what lives near Spider Rock after dark, ... well, it never really leaves. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there.